Hello, and welcome to this edition of the Vermont Report on Palestine, Israel. I'm Mark Hage. It's Monday, August 25th, 2025. According to the Gaza Health Ministry, on day 689, since October 7th, 2023, Israeli occupation forces have killed 62,744 Palestinians. They have wounded or injured 158,259 Palestinians, men, women, and children. The great majority of those killed and injured are women and children. There is still no end to the slaughter in sight. Yesterday, Israel bombed yet another hospital in Gaza, killed at least 20 people, including 5 journalists. Even Donald Trump, condemned this particular attack. We're going to begin this episode with a documentary of how the State of Israel came to be, with the support, material, political, diplomatic, and military of the British Empire at the turn of the 20th century. It was produced by Al Jazeera. We will follow that with commentary by Hadass Emma Kadar. She's an Israeli Jewish doctoral student, former teacher, and also a former student of Israel's education system. And she talks to the Turkish broadcast service about how that system sows fear, mistrust, and hatred of Palestinians and Arabs generally, how it presents misleading versions of the State of Israel and how it was created, and how it keeps young Israelis, in a state of fear about their existence and about the state where they live, including through field trips to the remnants of the Auschwitz death camp in Poland. And finally, we will close our program with the perspectives of 4 Israeli Jews who have broken decisively and publicly with the State of Israel and with its state ideology, Zionism. These 4 individuals come from different walks of life, but they are united in the position that Israel must end its perpetual war against the Palestinian people and its wars against its Arab neighbors, end nearly 60 years of military occupation of the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and occupied Syrian territory in the Golan, and of course, stop its ongoing genocide in Gaza. We'll begin, though, as I said, with a documentary produced by Al Jazeera on how the State of Israel came to be.
On November 2nd, 1917, Britain's Foreign Secretary, Arthur Balfour, wrote a letter that would set off a conflict still being fought more than 100 years later.
His Majesty's government view with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people and will use their best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this object.
When Balfour wrote of his government's intent to create a Jewish homeland in Palestine, 90% of the people living there were not Jewish. Just 31 years later, most of them were gone.
כמה אתה חושב אנשים הרגת ככה?
לא ספרתי. אני לא יכול לדעת בחיי. היה לי מקלע עם 250 כדורים.
This is the story of the British promise that led to the destruction of Palestine and the creation of the State of Israel. Let's start with the obvious question. Why were the British making promises about other people's countries? The short answer: empire is one hell of a drug. This was World War I, and the British were making lots of promises. In addition to promising a Jewish homeland in Palestine, they promised Arab leaders independence if they rose up against Britain's enemy, the Ottoman Empire. The Arabs did. Hollywood even made a movie about it.
Arabia's for the Arabs now. That's what I've told them anyway. That's what they think. That's why they're fighting.
Oh, surely.
A month after Balfour's letter, British troops took Palestine, ending 400 years of Ottoman rule. The people who lived there were Arabs, mostly Muslims, but there were Christian and Jewish minorities too. There was also a tiny number of European Jews who in the late 1800s had started building small colonies there. At a time when many Jews were suffering horrific persecution in Europe, they felt Palestine could be an escape. The idea of building up a Jewish presence in Palestine became known as Zionism, but it stayed a fringe movement among European Jews. Many of them felt they shouldn't have to leave their countries to avoid persecution. But Zionism as a political movement took a big step forward with an Austrian man called Theodor Herzl. And this guy is a very important name in this story. In 1896, he published Der Judenstaat, or in English, The Jewish State. In it, he said the only way for Jews to avoid Europe's anti-Semitism was not just to leave, but to have their own country. And Herzl didn't just write. The next year, he organized a conference in Basel, Switzerland, the first Zionist Congress. The attendees agreed on a program which sought, among other things, to establish a Jewish homeland in Palestine and promote Jewish settlement in Palestine. From here on out, the Zionist movement became very active, setting up funds to promote Jewish immigration to Palestine, companies to buy land there, and recruiting representatives to advocate for their cause with different governments. A few days after the conference, Herzl wrote this in his diary.
At Basel, I founded the Jewish state. In 5 years perhaps, and certainly in 50 years, everyone will perceive it.
He was only off by 1 year. Okay, so that is a lot of history, but it's important because the Zionist movement is a critical part of the story going forward, especially after it found a friend in the British government, where a lot of high-ranking officials supported Zionism, sometimes for unexpected reasons. Prime Minister Lloyd George, for example, was a Christian zealot who believed gathering the Jewish people in Palestine would bring Jesus Christ back to earth. Others, like Balfour, believed that getting the Jewish people out of Europe and into their own country would be a good thing. Herzl was pretty visionary when he wrote that the anti-Semitic nations will become our allies. Meanwhile, the Zionists assured Britain that their future country would be a reliable ally. So that's the backstory of how European anti-Semitism, Zionism, and British imperialism all led to the Balfour Declaration, this British promise to build a homeland for Jews in Palestine. Now we're going to look at how Britain did that. World War I had been a conflict between rival empires, and the winners set up the League of Nations to distribute the losing side's territories between them. They called it the Mandate System, putting territories once controlled by the Ottoman and German empires under the, quote, tutelage of advanced nations until they became independent. Britain was given the mandate over Palestine, but the Palestinian people were never asked what they wanted or what independence would look like to them. Listen to what Balfour wrote to one of his colleagues.
For in Palestine we do not propose even to go through the form of consulting the wishes of the present inhabitants of the country.
Instead, it was the Zionists who were consulted about what their vision for Palestine was, and so the mandate ended up incorporating not just the Balfour Declaration, but several clauses requiring Britain to ensure the establishment of a Jewish home in Palestine. British rule was very accommodating to the Zionist project. The Jewish community in Palestine grew with big waves of immigration. They had their own schools and factories and even their own militia, the Haganah, and they were led by the Polish-born David Ben-Gurion, the leader of their representative body, the Jewish Agency. To the Palestinians, it was clear that Britain wasn't delivering them independence. It was delivering their country to other people. In 1936, they went on strike. British forces tried to break the strike with arrests, torture, mass punishment, and executions. Leaders were exiled, weapons confiscated, and houses blown up. Palestinian fighters attacked British and Jewish targets, while British and Haganah forces would carry out joint raids on Palestinian villages. Something had to change. The British government sent a commission called the Peel Commission to figure it out, but their proposed solution was typical. Just draw another British line on the map, divide the country, give this part to the Jews and this part to the Palestinians, and make that part of Transjordan next door. Oh, and because the Palestinians were a majority in the country, 250,000 of them would have to be removed by force to make the Jewish state viable. Remember, these were the proposals that were meant to calm things down. Spoiler, they didn't. Instead, the revolt continued until 1939. by which time about 10% of Palestine's adult male population had either been killed, injured, arrested, or exiled. The British government really needed a solution. So here comes another report.
The Commission is studying the 20-year-old Jewish settlements in British-mandated Palestine.
The 1939 White Paper created a conflict between the British and the Zionists for the first time, because it rejected partition and said the solution was for Palestine to gain independence within 10 years, with everyone living there sharing it together. Crucially, it also imposed severe limits on Jewish land purchases and immigration. To the Zionists, this felt like a betrayal. In response, some set off bombs across the country, killing dozens of Palestinians. But soon, everyone was distracted by something much bigger. More than 60 million people were killed in World War II, including 6 million Jews murdered in Nazi death camps. Jewish survivors fled Europe, with a large number of them trying to find safety in Palestine despite the British limit on Jewish immigration. This set off a more direct confrontation between the Zionists and the British, with Palestinians often targeted as well. The Zionists knew two things. Militarily, they were stronger than the Palestinians, and Britain was exhausted by World War II, so it wouldn't have the stomach to keep fighting in Palestine. They were right. In 1947, after 30 years of occupation, Britain announced it was quitting Palestine and asked the newly formed United Nations to clean up its mess. Alright, 1947 and 1948 are the most pivotal years in this story, so let's take a look at how things are lining up. During British rule, Jews had gone from 10% to 30% of the population, and owned about 6% of the land. Under Ben-Gurion's leadership, the Jewish Agency was pretty much functioning as a government for the Jewish community. And the Zionist militias had tens of thousands of soldiers, modern weapons, and officers who'd already fought in World War II. On the other side, the Palestinians hadn't been allowed to develop their own administration or military. But as they waited for the UN solution, they were still the majority all over the country. In November 1947, the UN, then only made up of a fraction of the world's countries, voted to partition Palestine. This plan marked off 55% of the country for a Jewish state, but the UN never explained how it could be a Jewish state when half the people in its territory were Palestinian. To nobody's surprise, Palestinians, and in fact all Arabs, rejected the UN's plan. Ben-Gurion and the Zionist leadership accepted, but they saw an opportunity. With the British on the way out, the Zionists knew they would have the strongest military in Palestine. Their forces were instructed to seize more territory than they'd been awarded by the UN, and to do what was necessary to reduce the number of Palestinians in it. In cities like Haifa, the militia set off car bombs in Palestinian neighborhoods. They attacked villages and forced residents out.
Haganah troops have driven the Arabs out of the beleaguered city, taking many prisoners.
After inspecting parts of western Jerusalem that had been emptied of Palestinians, Ben-Gurion said,
"In many Arab neighborhoods in the West, you do not see even one Arab. If we persist, it is quite possible that in the next 6 or 8 months there will be considerable changes in the country, and to our advantage."
One of the events that helped speed up these changes took place on April 9th, 1948, when the village of Deir Yassin was attacked. A British government report to the United Nations describes the scene. 250 people were killed in circumstances of great savagery. Women and children were stripped, lined up, photographed, and then slaughtered by automatic firing. The story of what happened at Deir Yassin set off panic all over the country. As news spread, people fled, fearing they would be next. Historians have recorded dozens of similar massacres during this period. Each time, they would result in entire communities fleeing.
תמיד הייתה הוראה, והייתה הוראה של בן גוריון, לגרש את האנשים משם. כבשנו את המקום, טרקטורים חרשו את המקום. חרשו. לא נשאר זכר של כפר. למה? לא רצו שתהיה, לא חזרה ולא זכר של המקום.
By the time Britain ended its mandate on May 15, 1948, 250,000 Palestinians had fled. The night before, David Ben-Gurion announced the founding of the State of Israel, with himself as its first prime minister. He was standing under a giant portrait of Herzl, 51 years after Herzl had predicted this very moment. The Zionist militias came together as the newly formed Israel Defense Forces, but the fighting wasn't over. With the British out of the way, soldiers from several Arab countries entered Palestine. But the Israeli army was better equipped, better organized, and unlike the Arab armies, had a unified command and backing from several European countries. Israeli forces pushed into places that the UN had assigned to the Palestinian state, like the towns of Lidda and Ramle. 50,000 people were forced to flee from there, many on foot, in what became known as the Lidda Death March. After being emptied, the towns were given Hebrew names, Lod and Ramla. Like in many other emptied towns, the buildings and homes were taken over by the new Israeli state and given to Jews. By the time the UN secured an armistice, 3/4 of the Palestinian people had become refugees. In Arabic, they call this the Nakba, literally the catastrophe. The new state of Israel made up 78% of what had been Palestine. The remaining parts were annexed by Jordan or taken over by Egypt. A year later, the UN passed a resolution calling for all Palestinian refugees to be allowed to return home. They never have been. Palestine had been erased. In the decades since, attempts to resolve this conflict have again tried to partition the land. With each successive attempt, the territory offered to Palestinians in their historic homeland shrinks even more. Ironically, Israel is still struggling to maintain the population advantage it gained in 1948 when it forced all those people out, because in 1967, it occupied the West Bank and Gaza, bringing all the Palestinians living there under its rule. And so today, the population of Jews and non-Jews in this land is roughly equal. But those living under occupation have no rights, no citizenship, and no prospect of independence. The Nakba-era tactics of settlement, home demolitions, and expulsion are still used against them.
Nakba, Nakba, no! We want Nakba, Nakba, no!
Israel has taken the land but wants nothing to do with the millions under its rule. International, Israeli, and Palestinian human rights groups say this system is a form of apartheid. To see if that's an accurate description of Israel more than 100 years after Balfour's promise, watch this video here.
Elementary school, you always see around you all kinds of soldiers. We call it teacher soldiers. So you always see soldiers also within the education system. Sometimes they even teach you something or they help you with your homework, and they're always around. So this kind of military becomes also a very, very strong part of the identity of the good guys. These are the people who, who protect us, and they're good and they're kind and they're humanists. And then when you get to high school, you start literally learning how to be a soldier already with the age of 16. Because you're supposed to, once you finish high school, you're supposed to quite immediately, as soon as possible, with 18, go to the army. It's obligatory. So the system is also very connected to prepare you for that, to be a good soldier. And one of the things that they are doing in the system is to, first of all, give you you're obliged to participate in 1 week at the age of 16, 17. 1 week, you go with your whole age class to a military base to be a soldier. You practice and you even shoot the M16. You learn to shoot the gun. You're going through some kind of a shortened and a bit more light version of the trainings that you then do really when you become a soldier. And you put on the uniform, you have to do all the stuff. I was really afraid, so that's why I took it really seriously. And I remember all my friends in class and everything, they was telling me that it's just a joke and everything. And I was literally really afraid. First of all, they gave us guns to try to shoot. They were really training us to be soldiers, and I was still a kid. It was quite surrealist, I have to say. And we were sleeping in tents, like we were really experiencing the thing. And in addition, another quite known thing that the education system does is they take you to see the Holocaust camps in Poland. That's part of the system. You always have to pay for that, extra because the system cannot really finance such a trip of so many children. So it's subsidized, but you still have to pay. So there was always a solution what to do with the kids who cannot afford it, or their parents cannot afford it. There was always some kind of collecting money for them. So everybody can, if they want, they can go. And of course, it's kind of an ending point or like a high point after studying a lot about the Holocaust. You study from history books what was done to the Jews. We talk about moral things. We talk about the Warsaw ghetto uprising, and you really learn quite detailed about the Holocaust throughout the years. And then you come to the point where you go and you see it with your own eyes. You experience it and you smell it, and they really want you to go through that process physically. I didn't go with my class to Poland for different reasons. But later, I became a teacher. I was a teacher in high school, and then I came to see the whole process of what I've been through, especially in high school, as a teacher. And one of the things that I joined my class to Poland to see the camps. We were lucky. I was lucky to be in a quite left-leaning thinking team of teachers. Maybe otherwise, at that point I was already quite aware of some problematic situation of us as Israelis here, of Zionism. I was not declaring myself anti-Zionist. I didn't even think, it didn't come to my mind to talk like that. I was still very much in the system, but I was very liberal and human rights kind of defender. So whenever there was, for example, another assault on Gaza, and we would hear about it in the news, I would try to talk to my students and in high school and tell them, can we talk about, the children in Gaza there? That, let's talk about the victims inside Gaza. And that was always, I had to do it very carefully, because sometimes people students would report me to their parents, and the parents could tell it to my supervisors, and I might be either fired or put on some kind of a little trial they do inside the school, or some kind of sanctions or. So I was afraid. I was afraid to really speak what I think as a teacher. I felt the responsibility. And at the same time, I couldn't play along with what I already understood that is going on. So similarly, when we were going to Poland, I took it very much as a mission for me to not do it like everybody else is doing it. And what I mean by everybody else, this trip, usually you come as, first of all, you're in high school, you're 17, very wild and hormonal, and you're excited to go abroad with your classmates, with your friends. And there's a lot of experience beyond visiting the camps. But one of the things that is happening educationally, pedagogically, within those tours is that there's always a guide who is practiced to do that. The teachers are just, being there with them and following the tour. But the guides are mostly trained, they're Israelis, they speak in Hebrew, and then they are trained to tell these kids who are going to go to the army next year the connection between what was done to us and why we have to be soldiers in the army. So it's way beyond that it's just obligatory by law in Israel that you go to the army. You go there with your heart because you just saw what was done to the Jews, and the methodologies in which very, very often those guides are showing children what was happening in the camps is through playing music, telling stories, making it very highly emotional. And one of the things that I find which is the worst is to let them physically experience. So they would tell, for example, the whole class now, 30, 40 kids, should go inside like a train wagon that was left in Auschwitz. You should feel how it is to be, you know, squeezed into this train like happened to our grandparents. On a side note, I would say that not all these kids are Holocaust survivor descendants. I happen to be one. I have 4 grandparents who survived the Holocaust from Poland and from Hungary. And I think there was something always for me, already as a youngster, that it was a bit unclear to me what is going on, why everybody is supposed to feel sad like I do, hearing the stories from my own grandma and seeing what happened to my parents as second generation, because the trauma continues. And why people who came from North Africa are supposed to cry now in the camp in Auschwitz because of what happened to the Jews. I felt my solution was that they cry because it's just horrible. As a human being, you cry. But the guides of those tours would make them feel as if it's their story. And that's what bothered me. That's what bothered me. It's not their story. And they might be Jewish, but they're not European Jewish descendants. And there was something in that, you know, it's the kind of the things that you experience where you bring a lot of questions. So as a teacher, we and my team, we decided to sign up for another guiding company, which is a bit more relaxed, more liberal, and more academic, so that we are going through the tour by not doing all these experimental kind of experiences, and we try to keep it more academic, to tell the story and to let them see it more like adults would do. It's never perfect. Even our guide, who I found quite professional, there was always this kind of thing of adding some music, trying to color it a bit more so they really experience this thing. And I remember something that had an influence on me, 2 stories I can tell. One of them was that the students, so that's now as a teacher, being with my students, so I was 27 maybe at the time. One was that between the break, like in the break, some of the kids would say, "What is wrong with me? I'm not crying." They felt really, really bad that they don't feel sad because they see their friends, some of them are crying because it's horrible stories being told to them, or experiences or pictures. And that was quite a realization for me. The status quo, the expectation is that you come to this trip and you're going to break in tears and feel the story, not only listen to the story. Another thing that was an eye-opening for me was that we were sitting at the edge of the camp of Birkenau, I think, it's called Auschwitz-Birkenau. And we were sitting on the grass, and it was also a beautiful day, beautiful scenery in Poland. And the guide was talking about, look, this is the edge of the camp. What do you see? He asked the kids. Because you see the fence, and the kids were saying, yeah, we see that, there's a field, and they could see that there's a little town or some little hut of people are living around it, but it's in a distance it's a seeable distance. And the kids, there was a discussion starting to happen. The kids were saying, these people have lived here, right? They've always lived here, also then in the 40s. Why didn't they do anything? They could see what was happening, or they could smell the flesh from the crematorium of people being burned alive. They could hear maybe screams. They must have known what's going on. It's been happening for a few years. And the kids were really asking that, and I couldn't not think of specifically Gaza and generally the Palestinian situation. And I felt like this would be the right connection educationally with the kids. Not to tell them, yeah, you see, they didn't do anything because they're all anti-Semites, which is a voice that you hear often in Israel generally, not only in the education system. This feeling of growing up as a victim who became strong. So I'm a victim and I will always stay a victim in a way, but at the same time I have a strong army and I'm a humanist and democratic. That's the education you get, whether it comes from the education system directly or indirectly, from your home, from parents who are not so educated, from the street, from the media. It's all around you. And it's really just about making this small connection between seeing, the victims of one story and seeing the victims of something happening in the present, to make this small connection. That was the process for me. Just through learning so much about the Holocaust, that it was so easy for me to just clearly see that how come we are doing something very similar to other people? Different methods, different technologies, different times, different capacities. But we are literally oppressing, humiliating another people who are living across the fence from us. Anti-Zionism was a term that when I first heard it, I was afraid of it. And I never had in mind that I would call myself as such because I didn't know much about it. And then I figured that I don't know much about Zionism, actually. And especially since the 7th of October, which really changed my life and many people's life. I started digging fast and into books, into interviews, into testimonies, to fastly understand what is really Zionism. Apart from what we learn in school, Zionism was the salvation of the Jews from the Holocaust. And it's not completely wrong, but it's a very, very minor. Since 7th of October, I dived very fast into history books, into testimonies and texts to relearn Zionism. Because up until a very late point in my life, I didn't really understand what Zionism was. And once you read the text, it's all out there. That's the amazing thing. You look at the text of even important people in Zionism like Jabotinsky and Pinska and of course Herzl himself, and you see that it's colonialism. They are also talking in those terminologies. Up until I actually looked at the texts, I never thought about it like that, and I didn't realize that there was something inherently in Zionism which was violent and not humanist, like they tell you in school. And therefore, it was quite quickly when I understood, okay, now I understand what anti-Zionism is about. If we really want to live in the same land, in Palestine, and I wish I could do that, I have to live together with the other people. It cannot be anything else, and it cannot be Zionist. And I don't even care how this land is going to be called. That was how the story. I grew up in a kind of a normative Israeli little town in the north, and I was a really good student, so an excellent student even. So I was really immersed. I was really immersed in the system as a student, as a pupil, and the experiences when people ask whether Palestinians or how Palestinians are represented, I mean, the short answer is they're not represented at all. I mean, the only thing that you learn as a child and actually later as a teenager in high school, is that it's a lot about the Jewish history, which is also limited, and there are the Arabs. I don't even remember using the words Palestinians in school. Arabs was there, and they're always some kind of in a context of being our enemies. So it's really as simplistic as that. So that coming out of that system, and of course I have to say that it's in parallel to what you hear from the media, so there's some kind, it's coherent in a way that Arabs are our enemy, and Arabic is a language of which I'm afraid. When I hear Arabic on the street, I feel uncomfortable because it's my enemy, they might hurt me. They want to kill us, they want to throw us all to the sea. And it implements itself in many ways. So there is this enemy that we have as the Jewish Israelis. And in parallel, there is our story as Israelis. And I remember that in every classroom, and I studied in different schools during my life, but there was something very common, and also I saw other schools outside of where I studied, but there was something by the state that the classroom, the way it's organized and designed, is very nationalist, actually. So in every classroom, there is a picture of the map of Israel. I remember also as a kid looking at that map. It's a huge map. You always see it on the side of, next to where the teacher is standing, actually. It's always in front of you. And I didn't know much about the 67 green line and all kinds of things that are actually quite basic. But in the map, it was very, very mildly marked. So I always had thoughts about it. What is that line? But I didn't know, we didn't learn. What you learn is from history books is that there was a war, the 6-day war, and we won that war within 6 days. Very heroic kind of storytelling. The Jewish Israelis against all Arab military just won, and then they don't say occupied, but then we took more of the land that belongs to the Jews. And the storytelling is also always connected and referenced to what we learn in other classes apart from history, which is the Bible. There's a special class that you learn from 2nd grade, and maybe nowadays it's already 1st grade, until the 12th grade, where you graduate, and you have to also take the final test about the Bible. So we learn really stories from the Bible. You cannot learn the whole book because it's really huge, but you learn a lot of major parts of it. You learn to analyze the texts and to learn the stories, and they teach it a little bit academically, so I could really learn, let's say, on the level of literature about that book, but it's always passed on to you, even if the teacher is not believing in the story of the Bible and understands it as a myth. It is very strongly the way you understand your identity. You are connected to that. That's our people. And you learn a lot about the enemies we used to have, thousands of years ago. And that's maybe the only place as a child where I would say that the word closely to Palestinians, we have the word, and so in the Bible it says Plishtim. So these were also our enemies. And then I think the connection that I would make as a kid, when I started hearing the word Palestinians, I connected it, the connotation was to these Plishtim from the Bible, who were our enemies. So there are all kinds of linguistic things that are happening. And in addition to this map next to the teacher, there is still always the role of independence, it's called. It's quite a short text, but they print it a bit larger. that was signed on by David Ben-Gurion, the first Prime Minister of Israel, in 1948, in May 1948, when the Israeli state was announced, founded, approved by the UN. And it's a big historical moment. You learn a lot, like not the details of what happened on that day, but you learn a lot about how that came to be and the world approving us as a state and this declaration. And I think that's interesting because the declaration in itself, when one reads it, and you see it as a kid a lot, the text is in Hebrew and we can always refer to it and look at it, or the teacher can refer to it. It's exactly this kind of spirit in which the state was founded. The spirit is liberal Zionism. And that's exactly what, like with the years when I grew up and I became an activist and understanding the real story of Israel, Palestine, and where I grew up. Nowadays, one of the main criticism I have as an adult is against this liberal Zionism because it has a lot of contradictions within it. And this, as I said, this text of this Declaration of Independence has really beautiful words, as well as being quite racist, if you really look deeper into it. And it declares us as a democracy, regardless of, of the race or the gender. So it's supposed to look at the world, to show the world we are a democracy on top of everything. And of course, apart from the map and the Declaration of Independence, there is the Israeli flag. So these three items that are really like burned in your brain as a kid from a very young age. I mean, sometimes it's also in kindergarten, you already see it. And it creates a strong part of your identity, and you look at it in a very, very positive light. And you learn through the history books and all kinds of other books, and as I said, with the Bible, and in literature class. And there are all kinds of extra classes in addition that are nowadays even more like, not Judaism class, but they call it like a heritage. So you learn specifically about the heritage of Judaism, but it's all Zionism actually. That's another thing as an adult that I had to relearn Judaism when I came out of Israel, because there is so much history, rich history of Judaism in Europe and in other places that you cannot learn in school because it's so focused on Zionism and what it means, to be a Jew who survived the Holocaust and came to Israel. And it always leaves a lot of questions. So who are those Jews that are sitting next to me, but they are not from Europe? Like, they're not descendants from Europe. They are from North Africa. They are from Asia, from Arab countries. So I would say that as a child, I was exposed to all of this. It made sense to a certain extent. And it was very nice to grow up and feel like I'm on the good side, I'm the good guys, and it's very effective. With the time, I saw that in high school, we were indoctrinated also towards the army. It starts from a relatively young age.
They occupy our name, our identity.
I was still very much loyal to the Zionist ideology.
Those symbols mean something to me. That Star of David, that is on the menorah, that is in our religion of thousands of years.
You say God promised land, you said the Torah. You don't believe in the Torah.
I already warned that Israel would become far more extreme, far more closer to an apartheid state.
I came home and I told my husband, we have to get out of here. Israel is complete mania.
We call it in political science failed state. This is really a collapse of a state.
I'm a rabbi here in Stamford Hill. I born in Jerusalem and we gone out from there in 1970. My grandmother has died in Auschwitz. My father, he was a big leader of the Turkate in Jerusalem. He himself was a Holocaust survivor. I live in the Haredi Orthodox Jewish community. People looks like me, have a beard. This type of Haredi Jews, Hasidic Jews, Orthodox Jews, many names people give for these Jews. They have businesses, the prayers, the education for children, and that's all.
I was born in 1954. That is a few years after the establishment of the State of Israel. My parents came from Germany in the early 1930s and lost most members of their family in the Holocaust. I grew up in the city that I was born in, Haifa, and probably had a conventional Israeli Jewish upbringing and experience more or less until I finished my military service in 1974. I participated in the 1973 war on the Golan Heights. I was still very much loyal to the Zionist ideology and didn't question any fundamental way.
My family were very Zionist, but when you grow up in that, you don't actually know that they're Zionist. They were very loyal to the State of Israel. It took me a very, very long time to begin to wake up to what Zionism is and shape my opinion about it.
I come from a quite religious home. Most of my grandparents on my mother's side family perished in the Holocaust. When I was young, to go through a Jewish day school, to go to Zionist youth movements, and for Israel to be a central piece of one's identity, to go to Israel camps. There is an Israel that exists in the mind of Jews who live on the outside that is increasingly distant from the Israel that exists in reality. When you go and live there, you're confronted with that reality. And so the act of living there is the act of saying, okay, what is going on here?
When my father used to live there, he was demonstrating very much against the state. They didn't serve in the army, and he was beaten very much by the Zionist police. He was in prison. Maybe he was more in prison than at home. I cannot say much more. But what they're doing for the Jewish people is terrible.
The true isms of Zionism before I reached the university and started my postgraduate studies in the late 1970s. Conventional education that I was receiving had a very clear narrative, historical narrative of what happened in Palestine. We were taught that Palestine was an empty land, a land without people, waiting for the people, the Jewish people who were without land. We were persuaded that the Jews were actually returning to an ancient homeland that were taken from them during the Roman times. And a second feature, which was very important, is that the Arab world around us is hostile because of its religion, because of its political culture, and because it is anti-Semitic. And therefore, we are doomed to defend ourselves and fight for the survival of the state because they hate us or they are against us because we are Jews. When you graduate from the Israeli education system, you really believe that you live in a democracy that is loyal to universal values of morality and humanity.
You're effectively traumatized by the state, by the education system. And when you're brought up there, from a very young age, you're exposed to images of the Holocaust. If you were living there, this would be you. So just remember, the state of Israel is what keeps you safe. In Israel, you have to live in fear. The entire population is kept in a state of fear all the time.
Zionism is a state ideology. which means it encompasses every walk of life. When you go to the kindergarten, you already are exposed to the Zionist narrative and ideology as a toddler. And then you will be exposed to it in elementary school, high school, in the army, according to that nationality law. Between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean, that is all over historical Palestine, only one nation can exist, the Jewish nation. No other nation. And not only that, this law says that in order to assert the Jewish identity of the land of Israel, Eretz Israel, you need to continue to colonize, to settle, and to reject anyone who is not a Jew, who does not accept that all of historical Palestine is a Jewish state. That is the essence of Zionism.
When I was growing up, and now the Palestinians are compared to Nazis, they're not seen as human beings at all. The vast majority of Israeli Jews are supporting the Zionist project. Israel is complete mania.
Zionists were only invented 200 years ago!
It's not a simple thing to do. When you find out that your group is doing really bad things, and you realize that it's really actually very, very unwell, immoral, it's killing people, it's basically a genocidal. I, at some point, realized that I had to choose between loyalty to my group and my own values. I came home and I told my husband, we have to get out of here. I didn't want to live in fear. I renounced my Israeli citizenship in 2001. In fact, I feel liberated, having left, not just leaving the state itself and renouncing citizenship of Israel, but mentally leaving the mindset of Zionism has been incredibly liberating. It was considered a big, big betrayal to want to leave. They were horrified when they heard that I was leaving, and they said, you can't leave, you will never have any friends, you know, they'll come after you. These are the kind of messages that I got, and I'm not kidding.
Israel was never ready to accept the Palestinians as they are. Israel never acknowledged the crimes of the Nakba, of the expulsion of Palestinians, and there is an unwillingness within Zionism to meaningfully challenge that extremism. There is an attempt, especially on the outside, to portray Zionism as something that should be beyond questioning even, something so obvious and benevolent. The Jewish people have a right to self-determination. How could one in any way challenge this? The question of why are you conducting war crimes against the Palestinian civilian population within a broader context of what is legally a regime of apartheid as designated by not only human rights groups inside Israel, not only international human rights groups, but also now the International Court of Justice. Would you rather have that conversation? Or why are you singling me out because I'm a Jewish state, you must be anti-Semitic? You're just like the Nazis.
I already warned in 1999 that Israel would become far more extreme, far more closer to an apartheid state, that it would be far more ruthless towards the Palestinian in its methods, and would constitute a danger to the stability of the region as a whole. But I did not predict it to be so cruel. If you live in Israel and you declare yourself openly to be an anti-Zionist, if you are a professor in history in a university and you teach your students that Zionism is colonialism, or that what Israel did in 1948 is ethnic cleansing, you clash directly with the narrative, the historical narrative, and the ideology that your government wants you to teach. They see you as a traitor, they don't accept your criticism, and you get death threats, and you are being ostracized, boycotted, and so on. Like so many of my anti-Zionist Jewish friends, I was labeled too as a self-hating Jew.
They occupy our name, our identity. And they're speaking in our name in all these murder acts. What they're doing in my name, in our name. Everybody knows the history, knows that Jews have a golden life in all Muslim countries for centuries. How can people be so blind? Just open their eyes. I'm going many times to demonstrations, and the police stops me before I come in. Where are you going? I'm going there to demonstration. What? They're going to kill you. I thought, don't worry, just look. I show you a miracle. I go in between hundreds of thousands of Muslims. Nobody will touch me. You don't have to protect me. Just look. I'm coming every time among Muslims. I never see any anti-Semitism at all. Just look. From the Jewish point of view, where is the most dangerous place for a Jew to live today? You go the whole world, they will come to one point, State of Israel.
The question of what will happen in this land and whether, not a theory of Zionism that I was brought up with, but the practice of the State of Israel, and the state ideology is called Zionism. And the reality there is a reality that is not enabling of an existence which is going to work, of course not for Palestinians, but also for Jews. And I feel now that this is coming apart. And therefore you see that some of the most vociferous, determined, angry voices in this period have been the voices of Jewish people saying, not in my name. Those symbols mean something to me. That Star of David, that is on the menorah, that is in our religion of thousands of years.
The founder of Zionists, his name was Theodor Herzl from Vienna, Austria. He don't believe in God, he don't believe in nothing. The Judaism is completely a religious movement, have nothing to do with any nationality, with any materialistic things. The Zionists often waving the flag of the promised land, the promised land. You say God promised land, you said the Torah. You don't believe in the Torah, you don't believe in God, you don't eat kosher. How can he be such a strong hypocrite to take out of the Torah something what is for his benefit and ignoring all the other parts? It's written in the 10 Commandments, don't kill, don't steal. The Zionists ignoring everything about the Jewish belief. In the Jewish belief, the State of Israel will come to an end 100%.
Israel survive as it is in the long run. In a situation where it has to fight all the time, in a situation where its own society is going through a kind of a civil war between the secular Jews and the religious Jews, even with the huge American financial aid, when Israel's international image has been eroded like never before, and when the Jews of the world are not going to support it anymore. We call it in political science failed states or disintegrating states. And this is really a collapse of a state.